This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. I'm your host, Rabanzo. This podcast features conversations with me and indie music artists. Conversations intended to help other indie musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Hey kids, countrymen, musicians, countrywomen, friends, thanks for tuning in for another episode. This is your host, Rabanzo, of course. I spoke with two indie artists earlier this week, and I want to talk about it. Each one had a unique situation, both on the cusp of big projects, both wanting to move their careers forward, both facing obstacles. Their challenges are slightly different, but in both cases, they're kind of standing in their own way. It's a common dilemma. I do it to myself all the time. Reflecting on my conversations with these two, I am reminded that, number one, we need to get out of our own heads sometimes. And number two, creativity is less about inspiration than it is about discipline. So let me talk about getting out of our own head first. In both of these cases, being the calls I referred to, accountability would be helpful. Coaching, a mastermind group, a songwriting group, some sort of peer or mentor accountability would be a great thing to help one get out of one's head, because when we get too into our head or can't get out of our heads, we kind of get stuck sometimes. These type of things, coaching, masterminds, songwriting groups, can help with goals, especially your near-term goals. A lot of us are good at setting them, and but not great at following through. And having peers and mentors and coaches can definitely help. Goals aren't something to be thought of as static, though. They can be tweaked as changes in life and business dictate. So flexibility with yourself can be key to moving the needle and achieving your goals and objectives in this journey we call the music life, the musician's life. If you're interested in a mastermind group, if you are interested in a songwriting group, if you're interested in coaching, you can reach out to me at unstarvingmusician.com. I can guide you, in some cases help you directly. Sometimes getting out of our own head involves a little human contact, as a friend of mine once said, or words he likes to use, human contact. That friend is Dave Hamilton. He is co-host, co-creator of Gig Gab, the Working Musicians Podcast. It's a great show. You should check it out. I've been featured on there. I'll put it in the show notes. I can't remember what episode now, but I've been featured on there, and he has been featured on this podcast. But Dave always says human contact is a good thing. Depending on your situation, volunteering for another artist that inspires you might be the perfect type of contact. I have a story from a prior episode about a gal who asked an artist that she really, really liked and really aspired to emulate if she could work a merch table. And that led to a lot of good things for her. Maybe you need to attend or host an open mic or a pro jam. I've told the story at least a couple of times on this podcast, and I've also shared a similar story by Laura Price on this podcast, who's been a guest here, about a time when I moved to San Jose, California from Texas after years of building up a music community in Dallas-Fort Worth, moving to a place where I really didn't know anybody. I didn't really think about the impact that was going to have on me. I thought, I'll meet some people, which I did eventually, but it took walking into a jam, a blues jam hosted by Laura Price, that kind of gave me the jump start I needed to get back in the scene, and it was the beginnings, the spark to me redeveloping my network, which became quite large in San Jose, California, and eventually inspired me to write the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs. Maybe you need a songwriting group. I probably shouldn't get off that open mic pro jam thing so fast. Laura Price, she reminded me, and actually, funny thing, I mentioned her. She was hosting that jam, and years later, when she was a guest on this podcast, I realized that she had started that jam, that blues jam, because she had done a similar thing. She moved, I forget where from, but she moved to San Jose, California, maybe just a year or two earlier, and that was a way for her to rebuild her own network of talented musicians. Brian Wolf, who has been a guest on here, he's an Austin-based musician like Laura Price is now, and he was recently, I need to touch base with Brian, but he was recently hosting a open mic in the Austin area as a way to kind of network, get the word out about what he was doing a little bit and about his podcast for the Austin music scene, and just to meet other musicians. And that is a great path to take. So both of the artists I just mentioned hosted jams. One hosted a jam, one hosted an open mic. I've been on the attending end, so either one can be great. So if you're kind of stuck trying to get things going, maybe you had things going and suddenly you got stuck. A great thing to do is to get out and meet musicians, and one of the easiest ways to do it is to find an open mic or pro jam and take your axe with you, or take your voice and participate, meet some people. It's a great thing to do. Okay, now I was about to get on to, and we will now, on to songwriting groups. Maybe you need a songwriting group. Fantastic way I've learned from talking to artists on this podcast to keep yourself productive. I've even spoken with artists who've composed the majority of their albums, past albums they've recorded, by participating in songwriting groups. And for any of you who aren't familiar with them, I bet you most of you are, but they're relatively new to me. But it's basically a group of songwriting peers that most of the time weekly will expect of one another that they have a new composition in a recording. The recording doesn't have to be high quality, depending on the group, I suppose, but generally they accept any quality. Could be on your iPhone, and you get a little peer critique on the song, but it gets you writing. Most importantly, it applies a little pressure to get you writing. Roger Blevins of Mingo Fish Trap, who's featured back in episode 58, maybe the first person to talk to me about. No, he wasn't the first, but he was one of the first guys I really got into depth about songwriting groups with, because he was at one time running one. And Ray Prim, I think, is the first person that brought them up for me in episode 52. He was, I think, running or participating in probably the same group that Roger Blevins was. So that group kind of has a legacy. But anyway, my main point is, if you're having any creativity struggles, or you're just, you're trying to get motivated to write songs for an album, join a songwriting group. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to create your entire next album in a songwriting group, but it's been done. And more importantly, I think it'll get you writing. It's one option. I don't think they are for everyone. In fact, I've talked to some artists who are just, it hasn't been their thing, but something to think about. All right. Creativity and discipline. Also inspired by my calls earlier this week was the topic of creative writer's block. And I'll just call it creative procrastination, because that's what it really is. I used to believe heavily in writer's block, and I kind of don't anymore, because the fact is that, yeah, sure, sometimes we go through periods in our lives or days where we're so inspired, we're writing seemingly with little effort, but that doesn't come every day. It doesn't come every week. It doesn't come every month or every year. And that is why it is so important to make an appointment with yourself to write, whether it's weekly or daily, monthly. I hope it's at least weekly, at least once a week. If you're in the need to create some new songs, but you may be in perpetual writing mode, at least in your head, maybe not in reality, but if that's what you want to be, make an appointment with yourself to write, and don't break it. You need to write something crappy along the way. It's the only way you're going to write something good, right? 10 good pages for every good one, or maybe it's more like 20 or 30 good pages for every good one. Set an appointment with yourself. Carry a notepad or use your phone's voice memo app for moments of inspiration, but do not rely on inspiration alone for writing. Make a daily routine of object writing every morning. That is a great way to really hone your craft of writing descriptively and writing with all your senses. Before you look at your device in the morning, try it. Don't open your social media. Don't open your email first. Pick up your notebook and write something free form for 10 minutes, or try 20 minutes if you want. Set a timer. Don't edit yourself. Do not edit yourself. Pete and Crystal Demore of Ordinary Elephant, who were featured on this podcast, they turned me on to object writing, and a blog article about it. And I will put both of those in the show notes, but you can look for Pete and Crystal Demore, Ordinary Elephant, at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. Ordinary Elephant or Pete and Crystal Demore. They talk about it, but if you don't have time for the episode, just go to the website or pull up the website and scroll down to the show notes, and you'll see an article on a reference to object writing. Great way to hone your writing skills. I also realized today, as I was kind of putting some thoughts together for this episode, that there are a lot of good YouTube videos, or at least a few, on object writing. I'm going to put one in the show notes by Sarah Crookall. I liked hers best. She's got some fast editing, which looks cool, and she's kind of cute, so I chose hers. But there are a few, including one by the author of a book that is referenced in pretty much every instance that you are hearing me talk about. The book is called Writing Better Lyrics. I'll have a link to that in the show notes too for this episode, but they all talk about that book, and there's a video by the author. I couldn't watch it. There was literally no production in it, but hey, he's probably got, I know he has some valuable things to say about it, so if you want to check that out, just search YouTube for object writing, and you will find the author of Writing Better Lyrics, and you'll find the video by Sarah Crookall. So I hope these things will help you find ways to get out of your own head so that you can move the needle a little faster and easier. And I hope that these thoughts will help you with your creative procrastination. And if you're not experiencing either one of those, maybe you should or could or would refer a friend to this episode, or maybe something's going to stick with you and you'll remember it when you run into a friend who's going through similar dilemmas. And you can say, you know what Rabonzo said? My good friend Rabonzo says that so-and-so, Pete and Crystal Demore, said. I think it'll help them. Anyway, yeah, hopefully this is helpful. 2 things before I let you go, though. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe. You can do that wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And why would you want to do that? Why would you want to subscribe? Well, you'll always be privy to the latest episodes as they're released. Plus, you will help other musicians find this podcast in doing so, and that is a good thing, because you guys, we are helping one another on this podcast. And lastly, please consider signing up for the Unstarving Musician community. By doing so, you will receive helpful insights that I've picked up over the many years, that I continue to pick up, that I've worked, the many years that I've worked as a gigging musician, plus all the stuff I'm garnering from talking to hundreds of musicians from the past, and conversations that have happened recently on the podcast, conversations that continue to happen, like the phone calls I mentioned. And you'll get a free copy of the official ebook version of the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs. And if you sign up for the Unstarving Musician community and get those little occasional emails from me, I hope you enjoy it. All right, be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. And peace, love, and pancakes. See you soon. Hey, thanks for listening. Question for you. Are you struggling to move your music journey forward? I can help. If not personally, then by referring you to the next best available resources. Schedule a free 15-minute call with me to find out if I can indeed help you. It's easy. Just visit unstarvingmusician.com/coaching to schedule your call today. Look for links to just about everything covered in this episode in the show notes at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. This episode was powered by the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, how to get booked and paid what you're worth over and over again. It's available on paperback, Kindle, and ebooks just about everywhere you can find them. It's also available as a standalone podcast called the Unstarving Musician's Guide podcast. You can learn more about the book and companion podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/book. I'd love it if you picked up a copy and would love it even more if you left a review. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.